Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stories That Shape Us. My name is Joanna Daniel. Today, I want to talk about grooming in church. Does it happen in churches? A couple of days ago, I did a training on abuse awareness. I do training for your church. If you're listening and you're in leadership, reach out and let us arrange a conversation to see how I can train your church in how to respond to abuse. So I did a training in church. It wasn't for church; it was for an organization, small organization that I did training for on abuse awareness. And when I was talking through the grooming process and the fact that adults can get groomed too, it was amazing to the people in the audience because as we went through the case study and look at some of the real scenarios around grooming, there were many that were amazed that this happened. And for the first time, they could see clearly that the things that they had seen that they felt was they were uncomfortable with or troubling to them was real. And so I thought I would use this opportunity to talk about that because there's times when we miss the signs of grooming because it's church. And somebody asked a really good question. How do I differentiate between grooming and just love from a Christian brother? And again, that was a really good question because sometimes perpetrators will thrive in churches because they tend to have free reign. They tend to, people just kind of let them be. They don't get challenged. Boundaries are seen sometimes in some spaces as a bad thing. And so because of that, they get to have free reign and do what they want to do. Before I go into any further, I just want to say if you're triggered by this content, I want you to look after yourself, please. Stop watching, do some stretch, stand up, take a little walk around the room, have a sip of water, do what you need to do. Just recognize the trigger and apply some really healthy ways of helping your body to release the tension, right? So, how does it happen? Here is what we look out for. Some of the things I look out for is an adult who wants to be friends with the children, but not with the adults. And that doesn't always mean that this person is doing grooming, but I think that in the time that we're living in, we just have to keep an eye out on things. There's a pattern to grooming where somebody would come, they would really bond quickly with the children or with the vulnerable adult. The bonding happens really quickly, and then they create a level of dependency. So they become this person's confidant, right? They're going to be the go-to person that they'll tell things. So you might find that the child, the young adult, or even the adult who is vulnerable, and there are many things that can make an adult vulnerable, many, many things. They'll come in and they'll bond really quickly with these people. They'll be confident, dependable, position themselves as the only person for you to go to and share what's going on in your life. They position themselves as the only person that will listen to you and give you the impression that nobody else loves you, nobody else cares as much as we do, nobody else will listen like me. And so they position themselves like that. And so very quickly, the dependency level increases. Now, anybody who is helping you and don't create boundaries or respect your boundaries isn't a safe person because every healthy relationship have boundaries. So when they're coming in and they're creating dependency on only them, then just be aware of whether or not they will if you're allowed to see other people, whether you're isolated, whether you feel pressured into telling and speaking to this one person, or whether you feel free enough to share freely with anybody else, because sometimes that's a good indication that you're being isolated. Why are you being isolated? Sometimes a relationship that is where there's manipulation and control, not just for purposes of sexual grooming, but when the relationship, when this person is going to be it's going to be an abusive relationship, a narcissist coming in to attach to someone, they'll do this pattern. Sometimes they follow this pattern as well. So after dependency is created, the person is isolated, they're the only ones that you depend on. Then they start to introduce sometimes they'll start to introduce language that are, sexual language. There'll be jokes and there'll be different things that they start to do to almost get you used to the fact that this is who they are. Sometimes they'll talk about their past relationships. And one of the things that they sometimes do in this building confidence stage of grooming is sometimes they'll share some of their stories, but what you'll find is not nearly as enough as you're sharing. They'll share just enough to get you to relax, to make you feel like this is a reciprocal sharing relationship, and that they're sharing and you're sharing. But if you look at it and assess it, you'll realize that they've stopped sharing a long time ago, and they did not share anything too deep. The one story that they share and you have on hold, that's it. They won't continue sometimes to share. But by then you are so relaxed and you're so blindsided, you don't know what's happening, and you're sharing all of you. And then they'll get into the phase where the attack starts, where there is intimacy, and then manipulation and control. Because now you're shamed into silence. You're shamed into silence. You don't feel like you can advocate for yourself. You don't feel like you can tell anybody because you feel responsible, especially a young adult or a child too will feel responsible and blame, and the perpetrator will blame you. If you came onto me, if you weren't doing all of these things, then I wouldn't be, this wouldn't have happened. And so you're manipulated and shamed into silence, and it will continue then, because now you don't feel able to tell anybody because nobody will hear you, nobody will listen to you, especially if you have a past that people are aware of. So I wanted to just make you aware of how these things happen, and for you to be able to see it. If you're in leadership, if you're just a caring church brother or sister, that you see this, that you're able to help people, and that you're able to help people become safe, that you can help people put boundaries in place, that you can have a word, that you can, as leadership, do something that is going to be protective of people who are vulnerable. I will continue this conversation throughout the weekend around grooming. I will speak to the woman who this has happened to and she's living in shame. I will speak to the family that is dealing with this and some of the things that you can do to help to release shame and to move on free. Thank you for joining me in this episode of Stories That Shape Us. I hope you'll join me on the next story.